Yesterday was the day, and it was the culmination of months of work, trial and error, and I've been waiting for it to arrive since last September. I hesitated a little bit before doing it, but I finally bit the bullet, and I moved the pigs into this 5-acre cover crop field to let them graze, and they are having a blast. I'm Rob from Dottle Family Farms, and I'm on a mission to reduce the grain our pigs consume by growing nutritious cover crops for our pigs to graze while also regenerating the soil health on our farm. And while I've had some success last year grazing pigs on the cover crops to reduce my feed costs by up to 95% for 7 weeks, I had to think a bit more creatively to help graze year-round. In this video, I'll talk a little bit about my grazing strategy moving forward. After all, this is really just the beginning of a new time to discover how frequently I move the pigs, how much feed value I expect to get from crops like these. First, let me place this into a little bit of context for you. Last September, I planted this field with Austrian winter peas, ryegrass, cereal rye, daikon radish, purple top turnips, and clover. I wanted to fill in the gap of production that we have in March and April and May, but we had a 3-month-long drought during the time that I planted this, so I irrigated this field from a pond over there, and it took an inordinate amount of work, moving hoses every couple days, but the work paid off. And when we finally received grain in December, the crops were tall enough and they had germinated enough to really begin growing. Now in February, in some places this crop is over 12 inches high, and in other places it's pretty sparse. I planted it last September by broadcasting the seed on the ground and then disking over those larger seeded crops, which was not particularly effective. Few of the clovers and little of the rye germinated. The peas sprouted okay, but because they were broadcast, they're only in a few swaths of the ground. When I plant next time, I expect to get much better success because I'll be planting with a no-till drill that I recently purchased. It'll save money on seed costs, equipment costs, and time while I'm planting. Plus, we should get a much better stand of this forage. But I moved the pigs here last night, February 27th, and there's always a balancing act when it comes to determining when to graze cover crops with your pigs. For example, if I left this growing for another few weeks, I could get a lot more forage out of it, probably 5, maybe even 10 times as much dry matter per acre. However, if I wait that long, I will not have enough pigs to graze it, and I may not even have enough cows to graze all of it either. So how much ground am I giving the pigs at one time? This portion of the field is 5 acres, and it's divided into 3 different paddocks. The paddock that the pigs are in is 1.3 acres, and they could eat a little bit of that forage if I gave them that whole paddock of 1 3/10 of an acre. But I decided to strip graze the field. These forages are growing so rapidly this time of the year that even an extra day or 2 of growth can produce so much more forage, giving me a few more days of foraging before the pigs move on to the next paddock over. They could even last another week here by strip grazing. So the first section that the pigs are in right now is 3/10 of an acre. I set up a second paddock behind it right here to my right, and I'll let the pigs graze it as well. I expected the pigs to graze the peas first, and then I expect them to consume the grasses, and indeed that's exactly what's happened. By keeping in the pigs in the smaller areas, they'll consume the less desirable forages in more balance with the more desirable forages. If they had the whole 1.3 acres, they would eat all the peas and then all the clovers and then nibble on the grasses and wouldn't get a whole lot of diverse forage. Smaller paddock sizes force them to eat less desirable feeds, and it balances their more nutritional feeds as well. I'm guessing that I'll keep the pigs in each paddock for 2 or 3 days, maybe even 4, but it's still too early to tell. It'll depend on how other forages are growing, how much grain I'm feeding, and how well the pigs are performing in this paddock. In fact, in the 15 hours since I moved the pigs, they have already eaten most of the peas, though there are a few left, and still lots of grass for them to graze. Of course, there are 2 primary purposes to planting this cover crop for pigs to eat. First, the diverse feeds increase the quality of the pork we produce, especially if we're feeding a lot of really diverse plants. A lot of the forage out here is ryegrass, and while it offers some phytonutrients and different minerals, it doesn't really replace a lot of the feed value like the proteins and the amino acids. but it still offers a lot of benefit to the quality of the pork and the health of the pigs. Second, we plant this cover crop to help reduce the grain cost that our pigs consume. The peas, clovers, and brassicas offer additional nutrients as well, but they are really high in proteins and amino acids and energy that help replace a significant portion of the grain that we feed the pigs. But how much grain cost can we save, and how do we measure that? The pigs do not have access to free choice feed right now. In fact, I'm feeding them by hand and measuring how much feed they get. They were consuming about 150 pounds of grain per day as a group. And so at first, I'm starting to offer them about 100 pounds of grain per day, and I'll see how they perform. If there was more nutritious forage for the pigs in the field, more peas and clovers, I would reduce the amount of grain more significantly. Also, this group of pigs hasn't grazed cover crops in a while, and they don't really have the microbiome in their gut to deal with forage quite as well. Once they consume more forage, we can reduce their grain costs even more. Some people would argue that saving 30% on feed costs isn't very significant, but this group of pigs alone is eating $250 worth of grain every week. For the next 6 weeks until they go to the processor, that's a savings of $500 for 6 weeks. But we need to revisit something real quick. A lot of pastured pork producers will think that they're saving money by grazing their pigs on pasture. After all, they see pigs eat a lot of grass and they see fields of grass eaten and assume the best. And while pigs love a lot of the grasses, grasses don't reduce much of their feed cost. They don't contain the protein and the amino acid that pigs need to grow, even though the grass still produces some pretty good pork and does offer a lot of nutrients for the pigs. My estimated savings are pretty conservative, and they're based on calculations of how much feed I have not fed. They may be off slightly, but they're pretty close. Before I close, let me address something that a lot of people who are familiar with management-intensive grazing, mob grazing, rotational grazing of cattle might ask. Why am I strip grazing this paddock rather than rotationally graze it? Or why don't I move the pigs every day or 2 or 3 times a day? And while we rotationally graze our cows, pigs are a different story. They graze differently than ruminants do. Most people rotate their pigs in new pasture every week or 2, and pigs are different animals with different management types is the very short answer. It's kind of like when I mentioned in a video that pig milk has twice the protein and almost twice the fat as cow's milk. People ask why we don't drink pig's milk. If they were ever around pigs much, that answer would be pretty obvious. Similarly, if people try daily or hourly pig moves, they would figure out pretty quickly why we don't move them more quickly. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.